We will go ahead and call the meeting to order. The council president will be arriving shortly, and just before we do the attendance, we're just going to flip the order. So instead, we're going to start with Brandi. Welcome, Brandi, for a presentation on organizing our city government, and then we'll move into Kathy Griesmeier's discussion of federal funding opportunities, and then we'll finish with interim budget changes. And with that, can you please call the roll?
Agent.
Here.
Clegg. Halliburton.
Here.
Sanchez.
Here.
Thompson.
Here.
Woodings.
Here.
5 present, 1 absent.
Thanks. Welcome, Brandi. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Matt. I'm excited to present today. I guess while this loads, I'll just do a little bit of an intro. Mayor, council members, my name is Brandi Burns. I'm the History Programs Manager for the Boise City Department of Arts and History. And I get the honor of sharing with you the story of how we organized our municipal government. Before I like to start this presentation pointing out the fact that the Boise Valley had a population long before the city of Boise was established in 1863. This area was home to Shoshone, Bennett, and Northern Paiute peoples, and it was also an annual meeting place where tribes came together and traded. They, the tribes that called this area home, they fished in the river. They got to enjoy many of the things that we enjoy today, such as mild winters and warm summers. They fished salmon out of the Boise River, and it was quite the place to be. These tribes encountered indirect Euro-American contact from around 1700 to 1811. And then they were experienced direct contact once a gold was discovered in the Boise Basin area. And like many Western cities in the United States, Boise really blossomed as a city during the gold rush. Gold was found in the Boise Basin in August 1862, which is where I grew up at. Thousands moved to the area in hopes of finding gold. And on March 4th, 1863, the United States government created Idaho as a new territory in response to this large influx of population. President Lincoln was also very interested in the money for the Civil War. While the miners were looking for gold, farmers and families began to settle in this area so that they could supply these miners. The rise of mining interests and this population boom prompted the U.S. military to establish Fort Boise in the summer of 1863, so just a few short months after the territory was created. The fort's commander was Major Pinckney Luginbill, and he selected the site for the fort. They began construction on July 6th, and he worked with residents of the area to plat the city the very next day on July 7th. And this is the plat that they drew out. It was 10 blocks. They wrote, as you can see on the map here, they wrote names of individuals who were laying claim to the lots. And some of the lots were reserved for Pinckney Luginbill, and he wrote to his family, quote, "I believe they have given me 3 or 4 lots. If the town ever becomes worth anything, I will give the lots to you children." Now, I don't know if how long he held on to those, but they'd be worth quite a bit today. This is a photo of Main Street in 1866. You can see the dirt road that was Main Street. A lot of buildings had popped up in those few short years, mostly wood construction. And we were quite a busy supply town, not only for the miners, but as a stopping off point for people continuing westward. And Boise was really interested in being the capital. And in an attempt to prepare for that, the citizens had really started to spruce up the city. After only a year of development, Boise had, quote, about 60 buildings of various shapes, sizes, and construction, most of which were lumber interspersed with adobe peat or turf. We had 9 general stores, 2 breweries, 2 blacksmith shops, a lumber yard, a butcher shop, a tin store, and everyone is really, they like to point this out, we had 5 saloons. So you can imagine what the city was like at that time. We were designated as the capital because of the efforts of one of those founders that day on the plat, as they were drawing out the plat. His name was Henry C. Riggs. And one of the northern newspapers described him this way, quote, "He is a man of fine appearance and business qualifications and would make a useful member if he were not troubled with territorial capital and Boise City on the brain. The only things he has asked for yet for Boise City are the territorial capital, a branchment, an assay office, a distributing post office, and a division of Boise County, and the location of the county seat at that place." I have to say that Riggs was such an astute politician that he secured all of those except for the branchment. And because of those efforts, Boise was designated as the capital effective December 24th, 1864. Now, shortly after we were established as the capital, our first charter attempt was made. It happened right on the 1864, 1865 time. The charter language would set up Boise City so that they could take certain actions that only a municipality could, such as the ability to sue and be sued, receive property within the city for public buildings. They could actually establish a police force, and they could maintain roads and sidewalks. They could also institute fire protection, as you can imagine how important that would be for a city mostly made of wood. And it also allowed them to do contagious disease management. Now, this is a great 1873 map of Idaho and Montana and Wyoming. And in it, Ada County is just, it's actually quite large. It's this big. Boise County used to constitute all of that area. And so Ada County was divided out of Boise County. And we became an independent county on February 6, 1865. And the newspaper, the Idaho Statesman, described us this way, quote, "Geographically, our position is unequaled. With respect to the richest mines in the world, we could not be better situated. From necessity, the Boise and Payette valleys must ever be the granary, the garden, and the dairy from which Boise, Owyhee, and Alturas, with their unparalleled mines, must draw their supplies. The population of those counties will be doubled this year. It is not too much, therefore, to look for this to become the richest agricultural county of equal area to be found anywhere." And in that same article, the paper noted that the seat of government of the territory is legally here, though temporarily in the hands of a lawless mob. And what they were referring to was the Lewiston probate judge who was preventing the papers of the territorial government to come down here to Boise. The judge had ruled that Boise had been improperly established as the capital and that the territory no longer had a legitimate government. The judge also authorized the sheriff to prevent Idaho Governor Caleb Lyon from leaving the city, and that's who is pictured here. Lyon was quite an eccentric governor, and he was fairly annoyed at these turn of events. So under a ruse of going duck hunting, he escaped the territory and went into Washington Territory. He did that on December 29th, 1864. And this left Idaho without a chief executive. And this made the Lewiston judge place the territorial seal and all of the archives in the county jail under an armed guard 24/7. These items were really only symbolic of territorial government. They didn't really have any intrinsic significance outside of that, but they were going to hold on to them and not let them out. And so for 3 months, this occurred. They thwarted all of Boise's efforts to get the records back. But acting Governor Clinton DeWitt Smith finally reached Idaho. He had been trying for 6 months, but was delayed. And he actually used military support from Fort Lapwai to overcome the guards and remove the items from the jail. And he arrived in Boise on April 14th, 1865, to a hero's welcome. And despite all of this excitement that we had about becoming the capital city of the territory, there were a lot of people who were reluctant to establish municipal government. They passed, there was an election in January of 1865 to pass our city charter, but they defeated those efforts. The paper noted that voting was light overall, and the charter had only failed by 24 votes, and that really they weren't sure if that should count, since they were pretty sure that people outside of city limits were voting and had skewed the results. But nonetheless, the charter didn't pass, and it's just really, it's unique to think about how excited everybody was to be the capital city, and yet they were not willing to establish a local government, a local city government on top of all of that. Well, the Idaho legislature tried again in its third session to organize Boise City. In January of 1866, they passed House Bill 72 that incorporated the city of Boise within Ada County. The new charter was supposed to establish the city right away, by naming a temporary council and mayor in the text of the city charter, but somehow they neglected to actually name anybody in the charter. So it effectively postponed the organization of our municipal government for several months, until we could hold a municipal election on Monday, May 1866, which is just a little over a year after Clinton Smith had reached Boise. And at this point, you really see the anti-charter movement take hold. There were citizens debating the drawbacks and the benefits of having municipal government. And as you can imagine, most of them on the side of the anti-charters were because of taxes. They were very anti-tax. And the reason that they listed was all of the hardships that they were experiencing in Boise at the time. And just to give you a picture of what they were experiencing, I'm going to read a little bit of a letter from acting Governor Smith, where he wrote home to his brother. Quote, "The past winter has been the most severe of any ever known, and hence everybody is behindhand. It put back all mining operations as well as agricultural. Immense quantities of stock died, and owing to the impassable condition of the roads, provisions became very scarce. When the snow at last commenced melting, the rivers and streams raised so high that nearly every bridge in the territory was swept away." So by the time we're trying to get the charter passed in 1866, people were still experiencing the after effects of this winter. They were living in very small homes. As Governor Smith wrote, he declared Boise homes of the time, quote, "magnificently odious and grandly small," end quote. Now, this is coming from the perspective of a man from the East. So he's used to a different type of living at that time. The 1866 charter did fail. The people elected several individuals that ran on the ticket that if they were elected, they would refuse to organize. And so we had to delay talking about becoming a city again until January 1867. That's when the territorial legislature tried the charter issue again. This time they said you only get 10 days to hold an election. And of course, the anti-charter movement organized very quickly again. They won 233 votes to 133. They elected Dr. Ephraim Smith here, who of course refused to take office, and his council declined to organize. And of course, they listed taxes and expenses as the chief reason of why we shouldn't organize. And then things started to change later that year. In November 1867, the Idaho Statesman published an article that discussed the town site law that Congress had recently passed and how that law would affect securing land titles in Boise. The newspaper urged officials that had been elected in that previous election to go ahead and organize just so that they could deal with this issue of land titles. They especially noted that they didn't need to worry about anything else. They just needed to do this one thing, and then they could leave office. This town site law didn't only affect Boise, though. It had a lot of effects for federal property across the territory. So after a lot of deliberation, the majority of officials did decide to take office, except for Dr. Ephraim Smith. He refused to take office. And so they appointed Henry Prickett as mayor. And just as a little side note, Prickett would later serve as he would serve as a justice of the Territorial Supreme Court. Henry Prickett and the council met for the first time on November 18th, 1867, with two jobs: one to organize as an official body, and then to make a resolution that directed the mayor to enter the town site of Boise to the U.S. Land Office. So they went ahead and did that. The mayor submitted this plat, not this particular one, but this outline of the new plat. On November 25th, 1867, the city had grown from 10 blocks to 140 blocks, and they had reserved 2 whole blocks right here for construction of the Capitol building. And it took a little bit, but eventually President Ulysses S. Grant signed our town site patent on May 2nd, 1870, and we were official. The newspaper kept saying things like, well, they did the town site law. We're all legal now. We're not going to have the council and mayor worry about anything else. They're going to just leave. But they didn't. They started working on early ordinances. The picture that you see here is a photo of the minute book for that very first meeting back in 1867. The city does still have this, and it's in a nice archival box to help preserve it. The mayor and council, they got busy and created a city marshal, a council clerk, and a city attorney. They also passed ordinances to help prevent fire. And my favorite, they passed swine and cattle at large ordinances. Didn't have to worry so much about the dogs at that time, just the cattle and the pigs. And they developed what the Idaho Statesman called an elaborate license plan, where they could collect $3 a day from people that were selling patented medicines and $5 a day from hurdy-gurdies and public dance halls or fairs and other amusement places. And, you had to keep your yards clean. They didn't want you to discharge firearms within city limits. So they did a few more things than just file our plat. But shortly after that, there were still citizens opposed to municipal government. This repeal the charter movements began. And the statesman said, quote, "This levying of city taxes and city licenses is directly contrary to the will of the people." And in 1870, there were 60 male citizens who signed the charter, a petition to abandon the charter. They requested the state legislature to disincorporate Boise. They felt that Boise did not require a city government and that the municipal body was not worth the expense. And the signers of the petition included prominent citizens such as James A. Pinney and Peter Sana, who ironically would later serve as Boise mayors. They tried it didn't work in 1870, so they tried again in 1873, and the motion failed just because of a veto by Idaho Governor T.W. Bennett. This is Governor Bennett here, and he vetoed it for two main reasons. One, he concluded that the bill was in conflict with the Constitution of the United States of America, and he felt that it would not serve the citizens of Boise or the territory of Idaho as a whole to dissolve the city government of Idaho's territorial capital. He argued that complaints of inefficiency and mismanagement did not justify repealing the city charter. And he said, quote, "It may be said that the city authorities have been inefficient and imprudent, but it does not follow that we need no city government. I have yet to learn that the true methods of reform consist in a surrender to abuses complained of and a public acknowledgement. The same reasoning could, with equal propriety, be used in favor of dissolving all corporate governments, county, territorial, and national, for in all of them doubtless abuses exist. I prefer rather that system of reform which would rely upon the people to correct abuses by the manful exercise of the power wisely placed in their hands." He said that in January of 1873. And of course, he uses manful because at that time, women did not have the right to vote. So it was only men that were voting. So I just want to say, like, why is this charter still worth talking about? And why am I presenting it to you today? Well, it really shaped Boise. Between 1940 and 1960, our population had only grown just barely from 26,000 to about 34,000. We hadn't grown a lot in decades. This was because of the limits of the charter. Less than half of Boise's population at this time lived within city limits. So what you had was a majority of citizens living outside of the limits, and they were not paying taxes to help support the city services that they were using. The funding problems that arose became ever more evident after 1960, and elected officials and citizens were tired of having to go through Idaho's legislature to get city charter amendments. So Boise civic leaders arranged for Boise to become a traditional Idaho city with regular statutory powers in a special election that they held in August of 1961. The Boise voters did abandon their 1866 city charter forever. And after a few initial expansion efforts, a 1962 ordinance provided a systematic procedure for city planning and expansion. So now Boise was able to annex those areas of town that were, obviously a part of Boise, but not paying city taxes. And they were able to boost Boise's population over 50,000, which was the minimum figure required to be a metropolitan statistical area, or MSA. And this designation helped city promoters bring in federal funding. And what that did was it provided the catalyst for urban renewal in the 1960s and 1970s. And so the city charter really shaped, it both stalled Boise's growth, and then the abandonment really shaped our growth and created in part the city that you all govern right now. And I think that it's important to at least understand how we got to where we are today, and that I can't say this for sure yet, but we're still looking for other Western cities at this time period that had similar roots as Boise did. This whole, we want to be the capital, but we don't want city government. We can handle things on our own. So I think that we live in a really unique and interesting place, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about this particular topic or other Boise history ones. Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Brandi, thank you so much for doing this really amazing presentation. I asked Mayor McLean if we could have you come back and do this presentation. I know you did a version of this back in 2018 when Councilmember Woodings and I first joined, and I found it to be very powerful as we started our time in service here to the city, to have that context. And I particularly appreciate the fact that you've added the very beginnings of our region, which included the original inhabitants of the Boise Valley. And I also appreciate the context you have provided us about what our city needed to do all those many years ago in regards to controlling communicable diseases. I think for us this past year and what we've been through in managing this pandemic, for us, it's been somewhat traumatic and such a shift in losing our ability to go about business as normal. And just to have you have that context, to provide that context for us, that this is an issue that people have had to contend with before, and and that the city leaders have needed the power to address it in a way that keeps our citizens safe. So I just wanted to thank you so much for this really powerful presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you, Councilmember Sanchez. And I'm always happy to do additional research on other presentations, like all last year co-opted by the pandemic, but about women's suffrage and the contributions of Boise women to our city. And there is a rich history to learn more about those other communicable diseases that Boiseans had to contend with when our water supply was really poor, and other issues like that.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thank you. That was very enjoyable. Continue to learn a lot every time you come here. It's a very fun presentation. And I just want to go back to that saloon and visit it in person. If I get a time machine, that's where I'm going. My only question, do you know if there's any charter cities in Idaho still? Or
I think we were one of 3. I'd have to double check, but there could be 1 or 2 left that have not abandoned.
Interesting. Thanks.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for coming. And Lisa, Council President Pro Tem, thanks for asking that Brandi come and share this history with us. It was great. It's been a while since we've gotten a history presentation. We did quite a bit during the sesquicentennial, but that was a ways back. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, you're welcome, Mayor.
Next up, we've got Kathy Griesmeyer, who's here in the building. She's stepping up to the podium to discuss federal funding opportunities. This should be a great discussion because as all of you know, you were involved with, we had CARES funding to begin with that came through the state that, in fact, we've got quite a few staff here that were involved in distributing that the first time around. And now with the new programs, there's funding coming direct to cities, really in response to many cities, including ours, working with the administration, asking that these funds be made direct to cities so we have more flexibility to meet our residents' needs. And with that, of course, come future decisions that we'll need to make and an allocation of resources, making sure we get those dollars out to the public as quickly as possible for the biggest impact. And Kathy's here today to walk us through some initial thoughts. All of this is preliminary. The guidance just came out this week, and we have quite a few years to make these investments. But with that, Kathy, I'll hand it over to you. Thanks for joining us.
Great. Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. Oh, good. Looks like my PowerPoint's been pulled up. Thank you for the opportunity to present this afternoon. As the mayor said, my name is Kathy Grismeyer. I'm the Government Affairs Director for this city, and just wanted to share with you not only what we're anticipating in terms of the American Rescue Plan, which is the latest COVID relief package that was just enacted in early March of this year, but then also additional federal funding opportunities that we're working with and monitoring very closely with our federal contract lobbyists over in DC and with the Idaho congressional delegation as well, to ensure that city priorities and needs are being identified and talked about at the federal level. But first and foremost, I'll start with the American Rescue Plan, which is a pretty monumental piece of legislation that was enacted in March 11th of this year. It includes a $1.9 trillion in economic relief for a number of various programs. But what's really unique about this rescue plan in particular is that the city of Boise will be receiving a direct local share allocation. As it was with the CARES package that was enacted and passed in 2020, our local funding came through the state of Idaho. The city of Boise this time was eligible to receive its own allocation as a CDBG entitlement city. And so we received or are eligible to receive $36.9 million. And then as a part of this program, there are more than a handful of other federal programs that have been funded throughout the American Rescue Plan, but just a quick synopsis of some additional funding. The city will receive $2.9 million in home allocation for housing assistance, another $8.8 million in emergency rental assistance program funding, which the city applied for last week. And then the airport did receive another $6 million as a part of the airport improvement program. So there are a number, in addition to the local government funding piece that we're set to receive, there are also a number of other federal programs that the city can participate in and will receive its own funding as well. As the mayor mentioned, the portal to apply for this funding opened yesterday. And so Linda Lowry and her team in DFA will likely be working to submit our request to receive that funding. And then what was much anticipated was the U.S. Department of Treasury guidance also came out yesterday, and they released an interim final rule, which is then going to be used. The Treasury created an FAQ document that we look at really closely to help kind of review what the parameters are for this funding. Important to note that we will receive our money in two tranches this go around. So we will receive our half of the $36.9 million this year, and then we'll be eligible to apply for our second allocation next year as well. And we'll be able to use the funds through December 31st, 2026, with the need to obligate those funds. So we need to have a game plan for how we anticipate to use that money by December 31st, 2024. So this is a much longer timeframe than we had under CARES Act, where we needed to have money spent essentially by the end of calendar year 2020. And so moving forward, and also I'll ask if folks do have questions, I'm happy to pause and answer questions as we go along, since there are a lot of layers with the rescue plan.
Also on that, especially if anybody, Lisa, Holly, Patrick, if you all want something, just jump in. You don't have to go through me, because it might just, if you want to catch Kathy while she's going through something, just jump in and ask her the question.
Great. Thank you, Madam Mayor. What's interesting about this next round of funding is that we have three main buckets for which we're able to use our local share allocation. So this $36.9 million. One, first and foremost, to respond to the ongoing health crisis and health emergency as it relates to COVID-19. Two, also unique about this bill and was something that local governments spent a lot of time lobbying the new administration and including cities and counties as this relief package was taking shape once the Biden administration came into office, was to allow for this money to be used to offset revenue reductions. That was not something that the city was allowed to use its CARE Act funding last year for, and was a really key component that was missing in other relief plans. And then also number three, an allowance to make investments in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure, which is pretty exciting. And I know that there are certainly many opportunities within the city for us to make those investments. I will say, we've also been closely tracking how the state is anticipating to spend its money. So Governor Little announced once the allocations were announced for the state. So the state is receiving its own money. CDBG entitlement cities will have their own application, and then the state.
County.
Oh, the county. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Mayor with the Lifeline assistance there. Counties will also be able to get some funding as well. And so Governor Little has announced that he's really looking at from a state level investment to take his time in deciding how the state's going to end up spending their money, and wants to use what he's considering one-time investments for one-time expenses. Just, I think, important to note how the state is looking at how it will spend its money, which is also sort of kind of leading the conversation at the legislative level for how the legislature wants to engage in allocating the state's funding. The state has no authority in spending the city's money, but I do think it's just important to know what the state is looking at, since it will also be allocating some funds for local governments. And then I'm just looking at my notes. The biggest thing as it relates to bucket number 1 for responding to public health emergencies. So that is very closely aligned with how we were able to spend our CARES Act funding last year. So things like PPE, public safety and health protections, being able to offset costs for things like teleworking, ways that we needed to respond as a city, both from an employer standpoint, but also in providing services to residents. How are we able to help mitigate those ongoing expenses that are unexpected due to the COVID pandemic? So in terms of next steps for how this funding will be allocated, to offer a little bit of a timeline, and this has actually already started, this first bullet, but there is a funding work group here at the city that's comprised of staff in the mayor's office, DFA, and legal that meet together weekly to discuss best uses and recommendations. We've been closely waiting and watching to see when Treasury guidance will be released. And so while we were waiting for this document to come, which came yesterday, we've been meeting with different departments, beginning to understand what ongoing needs the city had, both from a revenue loss perspective and what those numbers might look like, but also departmental needs, as well as looking externally at what ongoing community needs might still need some additional assistance to respond to COVID-19. And now that we have received the Treasury guidance, legal and DFA will be combing pretty in depth into that guidance to help understand what are the legal parameters in which we'll be able to use this money and how we can best spend, to then match up those recommendations that the funding work group has been bringing together. Right now, we're really looking what we're understanding from Treasury guidance, that there is a lot of flexibility in how we might be able to provide for ongoing services. I had a phone call with the Treasury Department earlier this year, for example, on the emergency rental assistance program. And they were very much, your local community, what needs you have, do what you need to provide for those community groups that are in need. Document and put a policy in place, but do take care of those folks who you're charged with protecting and providing services for. And that seems to be relatively consistent with the very quick review I've done of the Treasury guidance thus far, but definitely flexibility and documentation to support decisions that prioritize certain segments of the economy or different community groups that have been disproportionately impacted by the COVID pandemic. And then moving forward, in mid-June, once we have some time between legal and DFA to really review the Treasury guidance and to have really kind of combed through the recommendations that we've collected from departments and from some community meetings, we hope to present a recommendation to the mayor and to council for you all to then move forward in awarding the final funding usage. A couple of different factors at play and kind of moving us closer to that is also figuring out how much money we would like to utilize within each of the 3 buckets. So Linda and her team have been doing a pretty thorough analysis of the revenue loss that the city sustained. And so now we'll have to compare that with the eligible revenue loss expenditures allowed under the Treasury guidance, then wanting to look at what investments we can make in broadband, water, and sewer. And then from there, also identifying what bucket of money we have available to provide community services and ongoing COVID expenses, both externally and internally. And then, of course, we'll continue to keep you all in the loop as additional programs come online at the federal level. So again, there are a number of federal programs that have allocations for funding that the city might be eligible to participate in. The state might also be creating programs where we might also be able to participate or at least make a request for additional funding. So there are a handful of moving pieces still at play here, but certainly something that we'll be very closely monitoring as we move forward. I'm going to jump into a different bucket of federal funding, so I'll pause here in case folks have questions about American Rescue Plan funding, timeline, and next steps.
Madam Mayor.
Sure, go ahead.
There we go.
Let's go with Councilmember Woodings and then Hallie Burton.
Excellent, thank you. Kathy, is city staff also coordinating with their counterparts on the state level as far as like broadband infrastructure and some of that?
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Woodings, yes, I think now that we have Treasury guidance and there's an opportunity to really fully understand what's eligible at play here, I think that we can definitely continue to have conversations with the governor's office or with legislators who might be a part of the study committee that the legislature has formed that will be making recommendations to the governor around how the state uses its funding. Prior to Treasury guidance being released, the legislation really, it was like a one line that said you can make necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband. And now we have a couple pages of guidance. So I think once we are able to really flesh out what that guidance means, we'll have more specifics we can offer. And we've had some initial conversations with IT and Public Works also in terms of what kind of initial ideas they might have about how we can make those investments.
Wonderful, thank you, I appreciate that.
And just, I just want to throw in something here too before Councilmember Hallie Burton. Our IT staff, the IT department and Public Works has been working on a conceptual plan related to broadband for the last year because we knew at some point there would be this opportunity. And they were very helpful in us lobbying the administration to include broadband in the list of things that we could likely spend money on. And I've also had initial conversations with the county in terms of their bucket of funding, which is $95 million, and their interest in working with us and potentially the other cities that have funding to make sure that these investments are leveraged most effectively, especially from a broadband infrastructure perspective for this valley.
Thank you. Kathy, thank you for the presentation. I realize that you're learning some of this stuff in real time, so thanks for keeping us up to date. I saw some of the stuff come out just today. So on one of the slides, it said, I think we need to have the money obligated by 2024, I believe, and then spent by 2026. And then the date that we've kind of identified as far as mid-June for recommendations. I guess I'm wondering if what the date for June is, if it's not the obligated by, do we think that we will know a lot of how we want to spend the funds by that date? Is there a reason that we need to identify it within the next month versus waiting longer to evaluate it more? Does that make sense?
It does. Madam Mayor and Councilmember Hallie Burton, thank you for that question. I mean, I think that there's definitely, we want to be able to show, there's been a lot of public interest, or at least calls and conversations I've been having from lawmakers or other folks within the community who are very eager to understand how the city will be allocating its funding. And so I do think that there's partially we want to make sure that we're being responsive to community needs, knowing that there are ongoing consequences to the pandemic and that folks are still struggling. And I think we want as a council and with the mayor's office to be able to present some recommendations. I also think as we're continuing to review the Treasury guidance and kind of recognizing what the state's doing, what the county's doing, I know there are a handful of webinars that the National League of Cities and U.S. Conference of Mayors are hosting. So I think it's an ambitious goal because I think we'd like to at least offer a recommendation of industries that have been targeted. So for example, performing arts and venues have really been left out of federal relief packages previously. Restaurants, minority-owned businesses, immigrant community, there are definitely segments of our community that were not really prioritized in the last round of COVID funding. We'd like to make some recommendations to prioritize them moving forward, but also want to make sure that we give ourselves a little bit of time to review guidance, but then make a recommendation, and certainly welcome the feedback and recommendations in terms of next steps, if there are additional sectors that you would like to see the staff research and prioritize in moving this money out the door.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just quick follow-up. I'm glad that you kind of brought up all the things that you did there towards the end. I think that's where a few of my questions were going to be guiding, is trying to figure out, how we do, apply and implement this with an equity lens. And I think that one of the reasons I asked the original questions is just because from that equity lens and a data kind of analyzing lens, it seems like sometimes we didn't really know that we could have done things better until, several months after we implemented some of those things in the future. And so I guess I think that there's probably some funds that are really easy to identify how we could use them immediately. And I also am hoping that there's some data that we can use to really make sure that we understand who we've helped already, who we're missing, what opportunities that are out there, and that we take the time to do that as well. So thank you.
Madam Mayor and Council Member, if I can respond, I think that's a really excellent point and something that we've seen a lot in the legislation that was enacted. There's definitely sort of a built-in focus around equity and equitable response to pandemic recovery. And so beyond, things that have been maybe more traditionally thought of, workers, particular small businesses, this legislation also really wants to focus on hardest hit families and communities. And so addressing health disparities and social detriments of health, investing in housing and neighborhoods, addressing educational disparities, promoting healthy childhood environments. So there's definitely a lot more focus and I think expanded eligibility usage for this money to really make those sort of like familial and social investments that we need to really help all community members and all community groups to respond. I would add though, if there are community groups that maybe have not been on our list, but that you're hearing from and you would like staff to connect with, please let us know. We're trying as best as we can to reach out to community groups that we know have been impacted, but I don't want to promise that. I don't want to miss any group just because I may not be in the know or have a personal connection to them. So if council members do have recommendations for other industries or community groups or organizations, nonprofit partners that we should be connecting with, please let me know.
And Kathy, am I correct that when on the slide and the council member asked about it, the June date isn't to have made full determinations on how money would be spent, but in the areas that staff is proposing, we look to build out programs so that we can get feedback from council members to see if there's anything we're missing around top of people's mind. And then recognizing, of course, that for the money that we get direct to the community, we do want to move that as quickly as possible when they need it most. But then there will be other longer term investments where we might say, okay, we're going to allocate this much money to broadband, this much money to water renewal, and we know that that'll take longer. But the community support work that the council provides feedback on in June, we try to move faster.
Correct. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Kathy. This is great news to hear about all of this opportunity that we're going to have moving forward. I'm wondering, since the governor has announced that, I guess we're going to cut off, I think, 3 of the unemployment packages that were funded by the federal government, I think starting in June, which means they're going to be cut off about 3 months shy of when they were originally supposed to end. I'm wondering if we're going to have anything in place possibly to help fill in that gap for folks, because as you mentioned, we're still dealing with the pandemic. People are still not back where they need to be. So I wanted to mention that as something that we might need to look into and see if the usage of these funds could help our people in any way. The other thing I wanted to mention, I think we talked about it at one of our previous sessions, was how we could not only reach out to those underrepresented populations that are currently in need, but also how do we start building that structure where we can have more underrepresented folks be a part of that next level. We have so many developers in our community, but not a lot of them are people of color. I met with a gentleman by the name of Dimitri Booker last night who was on his way to Sun Valley to meet with a gentleman who decided to sell his property Dimitri because he knew he was going to turn this property into affordable housing units. And he did it with that in mind. Other people wanted to buy that property. He specifically chose Dimitri to do it because he knew he was going to turn this into affordable housing. And so in talking to Dimitri, he's like, I'd like to see more people of color in this industry, in creating affordable housing and just being a part of the game. And so I'm wondering if we can also have that be a part of what we're doing with this funding.
Madam Mayor and Council President Pro Tem Sanchez, thank you for the question. The COVID funding work group meets on Wednesdays, and since the governor's announcement just came out today, that's something I can definitely tap as a discussion point for tomorrow. What is interesting about the Treasury guidance I was reviewing today is it does allow for direct payments to individuals, which was not something that was allowed in previous allocations. So that, again, just highlighting the increased flexibility in this new relief packages and also an opportunity for the city to get creative in terms of the types of programs we're responding. And then I would definitely love to follow up with you just in terms of how we can make sure that folks from underrepresented communities can be involved in this conversation. Certainly, again, knowing that there are many segments of our community that weren't prioritized in the last COVID relief package, and yet how can we continue to provide assistance in that space? The work group has sort of tossed around a number of ideas around COVID resource navigators that can reach out to underrepresented communities or help provide cultural or language assistance and in receiving some of the federal benefits that are still available in addition to what the city might be doing. So there are a handful of ideas, but I'd love to connect more if there are additional ideas we can discuss.
Great, thank you, Kathy.
And then I'm going to jump forward, switching lanes now from the American Rescue Plan into some additional funding opportunities that are coming at the federal level. Three kind of immediate ones right now is the House appropriations process. This year is the first time in 10 years that the House has opened up a federal earmarking process where we were allowed to participate in submitting some community earmarking projects to Congressman Simpson's office, which I'm happy to think it's safe to announce that we received $700,000 in funding to support the paving of a new taxi lane at the airport. We had submitted a plan also for recycled water that wasn't accepted but was submitted. And then we worked in partnership with Valley Regional Transit to submit, this is kind of jumping into number two, the Transportation Committee earmarks, but we submitted a letter of support for some State Street funding, which was accepted also at $202 million, excuse me. And so this is the first time in a long while this process has been open, but we were happy to, be a part of the process, have conversations with Congressman Simpson's office and be able to submit a handful of earmark requests, which I'm happy to report that several were funded. And then moving forward, the Senate is also opening an appropriations process, but I just confirmed last week that our Idaho senators are not participating. But moving forward, we'll definitely be communicating with them about what we did submit for earmark request over in the House so that if and when an appropriations bill does come before them in the Senate, they have an understanding of what Boise's needs are and can continue to advocate for the city on our behalf. And then a really big conversation that's continuing to happen right now is also the American Jobs Plan, which President Biden has been doing a little bit of a tour, announcing his infrastructure investments that he is anticipating to introduce. Nothing super formal has been moved forward, but just generally speaking, the White House sent out a one-page fact sheet in terms of investments that would be specific to Idaho, which I pulled up some of our key strategic priorities for the city in terms of transit, clean drinking water, housing, broadband investments, again, in just general infrastructure upgrades. And so pretty large chunks of money that might be potentially available here that we, could be able to align with some of the city's strategic priorities. But we should know more sometime in early summer as this bill continues to take shape. Right now, there's a lot of negotiating happening between congressional Democrats and Republicans. Republicans have released their own proposal, which the White House, I don't think really, it did not align with what their expectations were, but the president is continuing to have negotiations with congressional Republicans to try and find some path forward. And then as a city, we've been working closely with our federal lobbyists to try and connect department directors and staff with various administration staff members as well to continue to, not only introduce this city to the new administration and its staff, but also be able to highlight ongoing needs at the city, continuing to put Boise on the map and just remind the White House and the Biden administration that there are key investments that could be made here in Boise and that we would be good stewards of the money to help provide increased services to our residents. So we hope to continue making those meetings a priority, continuing and moving forward. And they've been very open to the conversations. And we thank them for their time to be able to meet with them and help provide additional context for our needs here locally. That is what I have from a federal funding standpoint. I'm happy to answer any other questions you all may have.
Madam Mayor. Thank you, Kathy. Sorry for being late. My granddaughter was in a concert, so I was able to catch just a portion of that. On the additional opportunities, first of all, I like what I was hearing about the ARP funds, and as you said, we've got a while to spend them, but we should identify those priorities soon. So looking forward to that process. On the additional funds, I know that right now we don't have intercity passenger rail here, but as you know, I have been working hard with a group in the greater Northwest to reestablish that. So just want to make sure we get that on our list, even though it's not on the White House's list. And for fellow council members know that that effort actually does look pretty positive at this point, more so than I've seen in a bit. But thank you for all your hard work. Really appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Well, Kathy,
Thank you.
thank you for joining us. And I'll echo the council president's thanks for your work. This is an unprecedented time with all of, first off, what we've experienced in the last year, with our concerns about where the economy might head, what we've actually seen here in Boise, and then now the investments that are being made in infrastructure around this country that we haven't seen in so long. And so as Kathy has navigated all of this, working with the council president when it comes to transportation, others on other topics, have really appreciated all the headway you've made. And I am optimistic that we will have an opportunity to work with the public on some of these bigger items, like the council president suggested rail, which will be part of a conversation that I have tomorrow. But want to thank you for everything you've done. And a lot of department head directors are in here right now because they've been involved in many ways, helping us present to the administration suggestions for what these bills should look like and cover. And so appreciate your help.
Thank you all.
Okay, next up, our final item, we are perfectly on time. This is amazing, actually, is an interim budget change. Eric's going to come up and present the financial pieces. For those of you online, just so you know, we've got quite a few staff directors in here as well. So Linda, Director of Finance, is here. Celine, are you here for PDS? Oh, Kelsey, that's right. So Kelsey is here. Celine is here as well. But so for PDS, Maria is here from Community Engagement to answer any questions if they're needed. And I just want to tee this up appreciate the work that staff has put into addressing much of what just came up in Kathy's presentation, the unprecedented opportunity to make investments in the city through ARP funding and the other funding that we'll be applying for. But then, of course, how in many ways lucky we have been that as a council and as a city, we made quick decisions to protect public health. We made budget decisions last year that were conservative decisions to prepare for what we expected to see a slowdown. And in protecting public health, reopening businesses, doing what we did together, we've now seen a boom that most people wouldn't have foreseen. And with that, so much more pressures on our staff and team to be able to deliver for the community when they're asking for so much right now. And so Eric will go through some of that. We can answer more questions if needed, but appreciate the guidance that came from the executive management team in terms of making sure that the city could provide what the city's asking for now, given where we're at.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, members of the council. We have 10 interim budget changes before you for your consideration. I will speak to each one at a very high level, and then we can address any questions you might have at the end. I'll note that as we go through these, the majority of them actually are cost neutral and reshuffling dollars or revenue supported. So the first two items are airport items. Both of those are cost neutral. One of them is for the replacement of some core network switches that run our HVAC, baggage, and communication systems. That one is revenue neutral in that it would be a reduction to another project and supported by federal funds. The next one is the airport taxiway S extension. That project it's really an acceleration, and that project will be funded through a reduction to the baggage systems upgrade project. The third item is also a revenue neutral item. It is the addition of 3.5 positions for the Department of Finance, and coming after Kathy's presentation just now. Those 3.5 positions would be directly administering the American Rescue Plan receipts. There's quite a bit of work associated with that. The anticipated funding represents over a three times increase to our current level of grants that we administer. There is a pretty significant compliance requirements and sub-recipient monitoring. And as Kathy mentioned, those funds need to be committed by 2024, but spent by 2026. So we do anticipate the time frame for administration of this work being quite extended. The fourth item is an increase to our time and attendance system. That project has been going through some additional due diligence work, and it is anticipated that an additional $325,000 is required. There are some significant efficiencies which will be realized through the completion of that project. The next item is the addition of 2 positions to our Human Resources Department. And those 2 positions are key as we look to expanding our service offerings coming out of COVID and addressing some key staffing level deficiencies. The ongoing impacts associated with those positions would be built into the fiscal year 22 proposed budget, which will be presented to you for your consideration next month. The next item is another revenue neutral item. Per council direction, it's directing the proceeds from the sale of the old fire station number 8 facility on Overland towards the grower housing project. The next item is another revenue neutral item. This is the addition of 6.5 positions into our Planning and Development Services Department. As we look at the workload within PDS and the amount of revenue that we've been receiving associated with that workload, we do anticipate that not only will these costs be supported through that revenue this year, but in the future as well. The next item is an increase to the capital project associated with our permit management system. This $250,000 increase will address uncompleted implementation issues and resolve some unfinished punch list items. The second to last item is in Public Works. It is additional funding for sewer trunk extensions. The fiscal year 21 amount has been exhausted, and any investments within this project are in compliance with the city's sewer extension policy. And the last 2 items are largely revenue neutral as well. One is the shift of a position from our Planning and Development Services Department, our Energize Our Neighborhoods coordinator, into the Community Engagement Department. And the second is a shift of a position from our Parks and Recreation Department. It's a long-standing vacancy in a assistant city forester position, which would be repurposed in the community engagement department to become a marketing manager. That represents the 10 items for your consideration. Be happy to stand for any questions.
Madam Mayor,
Sure, go ahead.
thank you. I have some questions about the PDS item. Whoever wants to answer that one. I don't know if it's Kelsey or someone else.
Sure, Kelsey's coming up. You can start. She can hear you.
Okay, my question is, that's a pretty significant increase to the staffing levels. And I read the memo last week that justified it. And I do think it's justified, but my question is, since there's been so much change in personnel, where are we right now with hiring a new PDS director that will oversee all of this new staff?
I can respond with what I know, and then feel free to jump in if you would like. So we are about 2 weeks away from closing the recruitment on the director position. And then essentially what would happen is selecting the next round of applicants and then moving to the finalists for interviews.
Thank
So
you.
what-
I am.
Sorry.
I hadn't heard about the process, so I appreciate you filling us in on that. And on that item, then my reading of it was it's anticipated that development application fees would increase enough to cover those positions ongoing. Is that kind of the expectation? It's like 577,000.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Thanks, Kelsey. Wait, who's that?
I have a
Yes, go
PDS
ahead.
related
Yeah.
question, so I thought now might be a good time. So similar question. It looks like it's revenue neutral, since the fees, end up paying for the positions. And I guess, my curiosity is that, are we going to still be able to keep up with the amount of stuff that's coming in? Or would we generate additional revenue? Would we get more applications through if there was additional staffing with it as well? And I'm just kind of curious, like, where are we on the edge there? Are we still like pushing, and barely getting by with that many, or is that enough to really take on the need that we have at this time?
I appreciate your question, Councilmember Halliburton. So this would help us respond within this year or the next year. As you look to that 3 to 5 year range and you look at the trends, we likely would need additional resources.
Yeah, thank you for the answer there. I'm definitely curious, just with the growth that we're experiencing, that we expect to continue to see. It's definitely something that I had anticipated was the need for more staffing there, and had actually thought that it might be a little bit more. So thank you.
Well,
Thanks.
and I'll jump in here too. I just want to say on behalf of staff, Councilman Halliburton, I'm sure that they appreciate your question because they are. Celine's here. And there are many of them that have been doing what that they have to do, which is respond to what they're having. And I really appreciate members of the development community also that have helped us think through where the pressure points are, what's needed. And that's why you see also in here the software that needs to be updated. But staff are feeling very overwhelmed. We're 5-year highs for all the application we're getting, and we're 184% of normal. And so to their best guess, they propose this. They're grateful that we're considering it now to meet the current need. And then, yeah, just like in so many departments with a growing city, we'll have to have that conversation of what's next.
Madam Mayor.
Sure.
Thanks. I just want to comment. It's unusual to make this many staffing changes at this time of year, but I appreciate the administration bringing these forward now. I think we've heard why PDS is so important at the moment. I think the same can be said for HR and the positions there. And the positions to manage these grant funds, I think, are something that sets us up, I hope, in the future to better take advantage of federal opportunities. So I'm really looking forward at the budget workshop to really discuss long-term needs and staffing and how we project those out, how we look at making them sustainable. For instance, these grant-funded ones are sustainable now with these grants. As we look forward, if we can get more grants using those same positions, can we make them sustainable long-term? I think we probably can, but just having those kinds of discussions to set that up. The one other one I'll note, and I've had a discussion with CE about this, I fully support moving the Energize folks over to CE, but also look forward to a discussion about how to best use our neighborhood assets and where to best use them. But I think this is a good first step to get us started down that road. So appreciate seeing that as well.
Thanks.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I'm 100% supportive of us getting the folks we need in place to do all of this work. And I just want to thank our staff who have been working as hard as they have under these conditions. And it's very impressive, and I'm very grateful to them. The hirings that we're going to be doing in HR, if I could just make one request, and that is that HR plays such a pivotal role in our organization, and in being a part of other hiring committees, I really stress the importance of having folks come on board with a strong commitment to DEI and knowledge of that. And I just strongly encourage that we look for folks like that who come to the city with that knowledge and with that expertise as much as we can. Again, because it is so important to the way we create our organization moving forward. So thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. I think the same thing as everybody else, particularly with respect to PDS, and I'm glad we're doing this now and not in the budget as would be our ordinary course, because I don't think those positions would be really fillable until October. And I can't imagine asking our staff to do all that extra work until then. My only other comment is very similar to the council president's with particularly the DFA positions, which I kind of take to be grant funded. They're going to be allocating this grant money and working on it. They're revenue neutral in that sense, but I think if I understood the council president correctly, longer term, they may not be in the event that the funding for those positions dries up. And so I wanted to flag it and help us all be alert to that possibility this year and next year as we're continuing to create our budgets. I don't know that I don't think we want to accidentally create unfunded positions and then end up with something that's not net revenue. Or net revenue neutral. So I wanted to flag that. I'm looking forward to the conversations that the council president suggested that we have in the budget workshops. And like the council president, thank you for bringing these forward.
All right.
Mayor,
Yes.
with that, I would move approval of the interim budget changes FY 2021 brought forward on May 11th, 2021, 1 through 10, and 3 position adjustments.
Second.
We have a motion and 2 seconds. Thank you. I think we've had all the discussion folks needed to have. Yes? Yeah? All right. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Agent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks, everybody, for being here for that one. And with that, we don't have an executive session, correct? Yeah. So we are adjourned till 6 o'clock. See you all back here then.